Hi, I'm Jim Boardman from Palo Alto Networks Academy, and this is the first of a series of videos geared towards teams that are competing at CCDCs. And basically the objective of the series of these videos is to train you on how to deploy a VM100 from an OVA, install it on an ESXi host, and use it to protect your VM servers. So we call this east-west traffic. So that's what we're going to be doing. Before I joined Palo Alto Networks, I taught at Alfred State College, and I had the pleasure of coaching several teams that competed at the Northeast Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. And one of the guidelines I gave the teams or one of the advice I gave the teams is I said, always try to keep it simple, especially in the beginning of the competition. It's a very intense competition. It's a great competition. It's a great learning environment. But it's very intense. Things happen very quickly, much quicker. It's a false environment in the sense that you're actually being bombarded with a lot of issues, a lot of attacks from red teams in a short period of time. But it's a great training opportunity for you. But because it's very intense, I always told my teams to try to keep it as simple as possible. You don't want to do anything too complex. You want to concentrate on the simple first, and then later on delve maybe more into the complex. So that's the whole idea behind these videos is to keep them simple and straightforward so that you can understand. In this particular video, we're going to talk about first about what your default configuration would be on an ESXi host when you walk into your competition area. That may vary from competition to competition, but we're going to assume that your ESXi host is in its default configuration after it's just been installed, and you have a couple of VM servers running on it that are providing access to services that must be accessible from the public, from the competition network. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll go into what a basic idea of how you should deploy your VM100 to protect your VM servers that are running publicly scored accessible services. And this we call east-west traffic. You're protecting your east-west traffic. We will also talk about in this video on how to ensure if you're importing an OVA into your ESXi host, how to make sure that that OVA hasn't been tampered with. And we'll do that by using hashing and performing kind of a checksum. And we'll compare that to the values that are posted on Palo Alto Networks website. So, and finally, in this video presentation, we'll actually import the OVA into the ESXi host. So let's get started. So throughout this video, I'm going to be using a slide deck which is available to you on the Academy Moodle along with these videos. And so you're welcome to follow along as I go through this, as I go through the presentation here, the video presentation. So it's basically a quick guide on how to deploy a VM100 on an ESXi and to protect your servers that are running there, to protect, as we call, the east-west traffic. So when you walk into a room, this could be a typical configuration for your ESXi host. You have virtual servers. They're all connected to the default virtual switch. In this case, you can see here the default virtual switch is vSwitch 0. This would be your default setting on any ESXi host if it's been set up and installed. And remember, an ESXi, it's a hypervisor. So basically what it's doing is it's allowing your virtual servers to use the physical resources on your host, which is an actual real computer. And in this case, as you can see with a virtual switch, it's connected to a NIC, which is a host NIC. It's a single NIC card here. And so if this is a web server, and if I want to be able to, and if it's a public web server, I'm being scored on it in the competition, and I want to, let's say an example is it has to be able to be accessed from the competition network as if it's a public server. So I'd come through the VMNIC 0, I'd go through vSwitch 0, and then I would connect to the web server in this particular case. So let's take a look on how it's configured on an ESXi host. Let's go take a look at that right now. oops, might help to put the password in there. Okay, so all right, so here we have a virtual server which is running on the ESXi host, and in your case, when you walk into a room, you might have several virtual servers, each providing different type of services. On this particular one, it's actually providing multiple services: web, SSH, FTP, SMTP. As you can see, it's connected to the VM network, which is a port group. So if I look at my switch, if I come over to my switching area, you can see this is my default switch, which is vSwitch 0. That's right here. Okay, and my port groups, I have two port groups. One is for managing my ESXi host. The other port group, this is where all my connections to the firewall are going to be made, and to my virtual servers. This is how I connect through this port group. So if we go back to the actual host, we can see we can access it here. And it's assigned an address. Typically, this would be the address that would allow people in the competition network or on the public network to access. In this case, it was a web server. They would type in, either the IP address of the web server or a DNS or a fully qualified domain name that's a record on a DNS server. But the whole idea is this IP address can't change. Okay, this is one of the rules you have. You cannot change this IP address because this is the IP address that's either matching a DNS record or so that it has to stay static. So later on, as we get into this video services, we're going to actually end up changing this address on the host, on our VM servers, but we're going to then take this address and configure it on the external interface of our firewall and set up a destination NAT. And that's what we're going to be talking about in later video servers, in later videos that are coming out. All right, so that's what we have. This is typically what you have when you walk into the room. Now, some of you may have your VM 100 already set up. That's fine, but you still would need. It's still a good idea, a good training idea, a good idea to understand how to set it up from scratch. So, where am I going to? Okay, so this is the way it's set up. This is where we're going to. Alright, so as you recall, this is the way it's set up. This is what I just showed you. Everything's connected through one virtual switch. This is what this is what the training, the series of videos is going to teach you how to do. How to set up your VM 100 so that it's basically, I set up another switch. So basically now, instead of the traffic going directly to the VM servers, I want that traffic is going to be filtered by the VM 100 firewall appliance. It's going to be protected by it. And how do I do that? I'm going to set up an external interface, and I'm going to take those fixed IP addresses I can't change. I'm going to assign them to my external interface on my firewall, and I'm going to set up destination NATs. So that's the whole idea behind that. So one of the first things I have to do to get to this state is I have to import an OVA. So it's very important that I make sure that I import an OVA onto my firewall if I can, that hasn't been corrupted, that hasn't been changed, maybe purposefully by the white team or by the black team. I've seen competitions where they actually did do that. So if you are importing an OVA, why not do a checksum? Why not make sure it's integrity? And so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go over to a virtual machine that I have. Actually got to fire it up here, so bear with me a second. So I'm going to power this virtual machine on. All right, so in this virtual machine, And we'll start right here from scratch. So in this virtual machine, in the download a folder, I have a OVA, a VM100 OVA. And here you can see it. Okay, so the VM ESXi. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a hash of this. As you recall probably from your training, a hash is a one-way encryption, right? So I only do it one way. It outputs a value. Okay, in this case, if it's an MD5 hash, it's going to output a value that is 128 bits. And that value, if anything is changed, okay, if I have two files that are supposed to be identical, but one's different than the other, then that output is going to be different. The output of the hash is going to be different. An example would be is we're gonna actually hash the whole file, but if I hash the text string, this is an easy way of kind of visualizing, of seeing how this works. So in this case, if I do an echo /n password and run that through by the hash algorithm, MD5, you'll see I get a value. Now if I change one of the letters in password, I'll get a different value. So let's go ahead and do that. So you can see the values are different. Now what's really cool about a hash is I'm going to hash an entire file, which is probably, I think, is about 2 gigabytes. So if anything changed in that 2 gigabyte file, if somebody came in and changed something, like let's say added a different user or messed around with the management interface or did something that was different on there and created an OVA of that, then any little change, it's going to create a different hash. So what I'm going to be comparing, now as you can see here, I compared the numbers here. So I got to be comparing it to something that's a known value. Okay, and these are the checksums that are published. In fact, any type of OS is going to have checksum so that you can be assured that it hasn't been changed when you download it. That when after you download it, that this is the actual original OEM provided OVA or OEM provided operating system. And so the values that you're going to be compared against are here in the slides. So let's go over and march over to the slides. Alright, so here's the value. These are published on our website, and they're also published on the Academy Moodle. I would advise you, before you go into the competition, that you write these down so that you have them. They are not accessible from a public web service. This would actually be accessible only from our support portal. So it's be a good item to write down before you go into the competition area. So in this particular case, we're going to be using the 7.0 OVA. So as you can see here, this is the value of the MD5 hash of this. So this is the value that I'm going to compare it against. So if any of these numbers changed in when I do my checksum, when I do my MD5 hash of the OVA, when I do it on the Linux Ubuntu client that I have set up, if any of the values are different than what I have here, then I know something's changed. Now, what can you do if it's changed? Well, later on I'll show you how to do a reset. Maybe it'd be a good idea to do a reset, or you could always ask the white team and say, hey, my OVA is corrupted. Can I get a better one? So those would be two countermeasures in which you can do. All right, so let's do a checksum of the file. So there we go, the MD5 sum. I'm going to do this of this. And you can see here the values. If I look at the values here, they are the same. So I know it has been tampered with. So that's good. Okay, so I know it has been tampered with. So next, let's go and import the OVA. Okay, and whoops, I don't want to do that. Let's move this over here. Okay, so I will just go to virtual machines. All right, and right-click here and create a virtual machine, and this is what I'm going to use. I'm going to deploy it from an OVF or OVA, and we'll just call this VM100. And now I will go and find the OVA. All right, so it's going to take a little while for this to do. So this is really this concludes the video presentation. In the next video, we'll talk about changing the default password through a command line and doing some basic setups of your VM100. So thank you for listening.